Today on You're a Better Artist Than You Think, how sketchbooks make you more creative, with Roland Allen, author of The Notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper. My first question for you is one you've answered versions of many times in the past, but I want to make mine a little bit visual. Why do I own this? And for the listeners to the audio only recording, I'm holding up an iPad.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I still have to do this.
Yes.
Again, for the audio only listeners, I'm holding up a thick 3-ring binder full of detritus, all kinds of Post-it notes, torn pieces of paper with scrawled notes on them. The plastic pockets in the front are literally bulging. I have like 10 of those that I just showed you.
I think you answered your own question.
Huh.
When you were showing me the binder, it was full of texture and color and different things and variegated. There's a lot of treats for your eye there. Your ideas were juxtaposed. You didn't have to open any files in order to rediscover them. You didn't have to worry about battery life or anything like that. But also, the main thing is when you lifted up that folder, your eyes lit up, right? This is something which you really like. It's like your soft toy or a pet or a pot plant that you love. You know, there's an affection there. And people don't really feel affection for their iPads, you know?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the whole iPad journey, which I think a lot of people have been on, was when they came out, they sort of highlighted the creative aspect of them. You know, the Apple ads were all about sketching on them, drawing on them, making music, writing, word processing, all the creative aspect of it. And I think with the exception of drawing, because people do amazing art on the iPad, it's not worked out like that at all. People basically use it for watching Netflix. It's a really, really good way to watch Netflix. And it's a sort of culture consuming device much more than it's a culture production device. Unlike your folder there, which is clearly a really creative space. It has very strong artist studio vibes, wouldn't you say?
Certainly.
And all of those textures and colors and just the weight of
Yeah.
it, the heft of it, the presence of it makes it into much more of a totem than that iPad will ever be.
Yeah, that's true. Hey friends, we'd like to take just a moment and invite you to join the Magic Box Brush Club at digitalartbrushes.com. There you can claim your 100% free lifetime membership to the Magic Box Brush Club and get new digital art brushes with accompanying tutorial guides every month for an entire year. Visit digitalartbrushes.com and join the Magic Box Brush Club today. Why don't we get attached to our devices? I mean, we get addicted to them, but that's a different thing.
And I think that when we buy them, I guess we sort of know that in 2 years' time it's going to be outdated. Never had that problem with a notebook because you know it's never going to be obsolete.
Yeah.
You know, we've had, 700 years to get notebooks right? They're pretty good now, notebooks. You can't argue with them. I don't know where the improvement would come from. That's not the case with a phone, is it?
In your book, you talk about this concept of the cognitive partnership with an object. I journal all the time, but sometimes I type, sometimes I do whatever that was that we were just looking at with the binder. But I kept more of a true journal all through high school and well into college, even after that, years and years and years. One of my favorite journals from that time is titled My Brain in a Jar.
Oh, lovely.
That's actually the title of the journal. And I was like, wow, I knew this idea that you're talking about, the cognitive partnership. Even as a teenager, it was intuitive. How did I know that?
This is a really interesting concept, that thing of inanimate objects which are inanimate but still help us to think in some way. There's a difference between a stick and a stick with lines on it, which has become a ruler. Because with the ruler, you can do other kinds of really interesting things. You can draw straight lines or you can measure stuff. With a stick, you just can't. A stick's very useful in other ways, but it won't help you think. Once you've noticed it, as you did, you start seeing it everywhere. You know, books do definitely help us think. Musical instruments, I think, play a role in that very much, but notebooks, canvases, whiteboards, chalkboards, whatever, anything where you can express yourself or which helps you express yourself can be really important. I think once you've experienced diaries over, say, a couple of years or so, and you realize the part that they play in your life and how they can help you reflect and how they can become a kind of active partner in your mental and emotional life, no one ever teaches us that. You basically learn it for yourself, don't you?
I feel like I often can't think if I'm trying to take notes on my iPad. I use my iPad for painting almost every day. So obviously there is thinking happening visually, but when it comes to lesson prep or just processing life, whatever,
Mm.
anything that's more verbal, really, I almost cannot do it.
I'm a much more verbal person than a visual person, but a big part of my job is presenting, sales presentations, sales conferences. At the moment, I'm doing lots of sales conferences and just presenting books to salespeople, which I love. And it's exactly that kind of experience. When I have to prepare these presentations or interviews or book talks or anything like that, if I make a few scribbled notes in a notebook, that's enough. That'll get me through. Odd words on the page. If I have to type it, because for instance, if I had to share the notes afterwards, oh my God, it takes ages. It takes half a day to do a 20-minute presentation, which I would normally literally do in 10 minutes with a cup of coffee, if I could write it by hand in a notebook. So yeah, there's a definite efficiency gain as well, if you're not having to type your thoughts in full, rather long sentences.
Right. I feel restricted by the rectangle.
Mm.
And the reason that binder I showed you is so full of, so many different kinds of paper is because the materials don't matter to me. But I need to be able to lay stuff out on a table. The bigger the workspace, the better.
Juxtaposition is so important.
Yeah. For example, even if I'm writing a linear script, the process I use there is usually I have notes that I've just collected from all over the place, and I will go and kind of retype those into a document. But then I print that document out, and then I go handwrite on that. I literally use scissors and Scotch tape, and I move things around and rearrange them. And then that starts getting covered in Post-it notes until it becomes so unwieldy and unreadable that then I have to go put it back into the linear process.
But it's so rich, isn't it? It's such a rich process. That's exactly what I do with writing when I'm drafting at the moment. I'm writing another book and I've got 4 chapters in. I've got them printed out, massive, great big bulky printout. And I've done it especially so that you've got a page on the left half of the sheet. The right half of the sheet is blank. So I'm just attacking that with a pencil. And every page, the right half is now covered in pencil.
Yeah.
And I'm deliberately just leaving it there to incubate or to mature or to fester, depending on your point of view. And then in 6 months' time or less, I will go back to it. And all of those notes will make sense relating to the original manuscript. It'll be very easy to move things around, to cut things, to replace things, to swap sections. Really looking forward to that. But at the moment, this physical thing is so helpful. I put so much more into it than I would if it was a document.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When I saw the title of your book, I thought, well, that's a cool idea. But it wasn't until I finished the book, I got to the end and I looked back and went, oh, wow, it really is a history of thinking on paper. It's not just about a notebook. It's about a sketchbook. It's about accounting. It's about music. It's about all the different ways that we think on paper. It also got me thinking about the blank page or the blank canvas. There is something beckoning about the blank page, about the blank canvas, that is not the same as a new digital document. Is it the infinity of the digital? What do you think that is?
One theory, and no one can know if this is true or not. One theory is that when we get creative with a thing, with a notebook or with a canvas, I'm sure this is the same, we're using a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is the mental map. So a cab driver, for instance, or a ship's pilot will have a very, very highly developed hippocampus. It's right down in the bottom of the brain. And when we engage that, we're thinking geographically about things. So it's quite curious. Why would you think geographically if you're writing in a notebook? And it's because while you're doing it, while you're writing in it, your notebook becomes a place in your mind. You'll recognize this feeling from navigating your folder. You'll think, oh, that thought, where did I put that down? That was on a post-it note and it was stuck to the back of something and it was in the back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I can't remember where, but I know it was on the left.
Yeah.
I've always got this feeling in notebooks. I can't remember which page, but I know it's sort of halfway down on the left.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You recognize this. Yeah. And so this is exactly the same part of the brain that takes you to the supermarket without getting lost.
Huh.
Now, you don't get that when you're writing on an iPad. As an artist, it may be different, but when you're writing on an iPad, they know that you don't do this. And they suspect it's because the iPad or the computer is just one place. Once you scroll up the page, or once your document scrolls up, it just vanishes. You have no frame of reference, so your brain has nothing to latch onto, or that part of your brain has nothing to latch onto. And if it's all sort of lost in some vague, it's in the box, somewhere in the box, then you can't, I think, juxtapose in the same way as you can if it's out there in front of you on physical matter. And I think juxtaposition is so important, whether it's just taking something neat, a neat idea, and slotting it in where it belongs, or crunching together two things which are surprising and contrasting or harmonious, visually or verbally or mathematically. It doesn't really matter. I don't really think at a fundamental level there's as much difference as we normally think. You can do that so much more easily on the page than you can on a computer, certainly.
The way I've described it in the past is I feel like I'm looking through a window at my ideas, and I don't like that. I want to be able to see as many of them at once as possible.
Yeah, exactly. There are great descriptions of the writer Bob Caro. Bob Caro, he writes massive biographies, and he's beloved by nonfiction writers, including me, because he's able to write these huge books which are massively researched and yet also poetic.
Wow.
And which read as addictively as novels, and every sentence is beautiful. And his office is like an enormous notebook because every wall is corkboard, and he's very neat and well organized about it. He has chapter summaries which are lined up in a row, and then underneath it he has lists of sources and he has further notes and things like that. And he's literally created this notebook which he can walk into. And what the beautiful thing about it is, it's been described many, many times by people who have interviewed him and so on. He doesn't let anyone take photos of it. No one's seen it. For him, it's completely intimate and private. And that makes it even more like a notebook because, of course, we're quite reluctant normally to let other people delve into it, certainly to take pictures. Someone once, a blogger, took some photos of my notebooks and diaries once for a piece she did, which was great. But it gave me like 30 seconds of real discomfort when I first opened these things, which were harmless,
Yeah.
Artists' tables and desks are always fascinating to look at, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Why are notebooks so endlessly fascinating? There are certain aspects of a sketchbook that are going to be the same from artist to artist, more or less. And yet, never gets old. Always want to see.
No, I completely agree. I think there's a fascination with process. Personally, I love process. I love to see the drafts, because I work in book publishing. It's quite often for me to see a rough version of a visual, a rough version of an illustration, the pencil version of the book cover or the jigsaw or whatever it is. And when the first pencil comes in, that can be so amazing. It's really, really exciting. However good the final artwork is, it never quite recaptures that sense of you're watching something in progress.
Absolutely.
And some people, I think, don't feel the same way. But in a gallery, when they have the big retrospective of Picasso or whoever, I'm always drawn to the cabinet where they have the sketchbooks. With diaries, it's a bit different, obviously, because they're not creative in the same way. But it's interesting. I was speaking last week with a guy who collects diaries. He runs the Great Diary Project in London. And he says he has an hour's bus journey each way to work. And he sits there reading other people's diaries, 100 years old, 60 years old.
Wow.
And I said, doesn't it get boring? Never. It's never boring.
Wow.
Like, even if they're really repetitive, you just move quickly through them. He gets to know and to love all of the people whose diaries he reads. And he just reads huge numbers of them.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing. The reason I started journaling in high school, I was in speech and drama team, and I was at an awards ceremony for one of the tournaments. And I was sitting behind this cool goth kid with spiky green and black hair and a Matrix kind of trench coat. And the whole row in front of me were passing this person's sketchbook back and forth and just marveling at it and whispering, speaking in hushed tones about how beautiful it was. And I wasn't a shy kid, but this was a bit forward for me. But I actually asked the stranger if I could see it just because I was so curious about what people were reacting to. And I remember the size of it. I remember the weight, the texture, the colors on the page. And they were using watercolor and line and things that I'd never considered. I was like, you can do that? They would tear lines of text out of books and tape them into the page and then draw around that. We might call that creative journaling now, but this just changed my life. It was the vulnerability and the sort of raw, unfiltered, and I don't remember how good it was, but sort of a confessional, poetic outpouring verbally that was happening alongside those images. I think that was so important.
You don't have the pressure to name it, do you, either?
Right.
When you've created a piece of art, it needs to be sort of labeled and you need to contextualize it yourself. Whereas if you're doing mad visual things, verbal things in a journal, you don't have to do that.
Yeah. Can you tell us about Cimabue and Giotto and this idea of preliminary processes and how paper and sketchbooks empowered this?
So the one thing you should know about me as a bit of background context is I work for an illustrated book publisher, or I've always worked for illustrated book publishers. And one of the lines which I've worked in for decades now is how to draw books as a publisher or as a salesperson. How to draw books. I know them really, really well. And I know successful authors in this field, people who teach drawing very well, instructional art for hobbyists. So I know how that works. I'm not a great pencil artist myself. I can do a building. I can't do a face. But I have a rough idea about how you get good at pencil drawing once you apply yourself to it. That's the context. When I was researching the first part of the story, what happened was it took me a while to track down where notebooks, paper notebooks, first popped into Europe. And it is on the historical record, but you have to go to the economic historians because the first ones in Italy were bankers' notebooks, merchants' ledgers, and they were being used for financial calculations. And there's a really good, well-attested history there. They have a real impact on the world, which we won't go into here, but they were really important, those ledgers. So there's a good deal in the book about them. And they sort of started to really peak and become like the information technology of their day in Florence around the year 1300 or a bit before. And I didn't know anything about this town or this place, this time at all. So I went and read about it. I Googled about it and found that 1300 in Florence was a really interesting time and place. So you have Dante, he's writing at this point in Florentine dialect, in Tuscan dialect, and he's basically inventing poetic forms and language, poetic style, which goes on to become the Italian poetic language, therefore the Italian literary language, therefore the Italian that you learn in school today is Tuscan dialect from the 13th century, as opposed to all of these other Italian dialects they had to choose from. I think the notebook is involved there, definitely. And at the same time as well, in the visual arts, there's this guy called Giotto, who Dante actually writes about. They probably knew each other. Okay, so who's Giotto? Artists revere him because he was the first Western artist to be able to sort of paint space, to be able to paint a room and then locate people inside the room and they look like they were in it, yeah? To be able to paint a throne, put a king on a throne and he looked like he was sitting on a real chair. To be able to draw just a human likeness. So for instance, before Giotto, we don't know what any pope looked like. Yeah, we have pictures of all of them, but they're very formal, schematized. We know they're the pope because of the hat they wear.
Right.
They look identical to the king,
right,
except the king's got a crown, pope's got a big hat. And after Giotto, we know, I think, what every pope looks like because there is a good, realistic portrait in fresco or in oils of all of them. That's quite a big deal, I think. And it seems to not quite come out of nowhere. Like the generation before Giotto, which was Cimabue, were pretty good at that, but still they're making this work, which to us looks iconic, Byzantine, very formal, not realistic. Again, real trouble depicting space, real trouble making mass and weight in art. Very graphic, amazing lines, amazing emotion, but no realism. So something happened around that time which unlocked all of the sort of tricks of classic Western art, which I'd been learning about because I was selling books which had them in, like perspective, modeling, how to draw a hand, how to draw a face, all of that drawing on the right side of the brain stuff, which is totally commonplace now. Cross-hatching or hatching, full stop, was invented. There was a point in Western art when no one had done hatching before, and then afterwards everyone did. And something as basic as that, just drawing repeated lines. To me, it's not a coincidence that it happens at the same time as paper turns up. And every single how to draw book I ever published, at some point, the writer says in it, you have to have a sketchbook and you have to just sketch a little in it all the time. And that's how you'll get good. If you just sketch things all the time, that's really the way to do it. The problem is that there are no surviving sketchbooks from this period. So it is a big problem for me trying to stand this theory up. But whenever people write about the artists of this period, including artists themselves like Ghiberti, who comes along a little bit later, but sort of is from the same culture and time, he says, carry a paper book with you at all times.
Wow.
Leonardo later on says, carry a paper book with you at all times. And it's clear that it had become standard among artists. That was how you progressed. So I believe them when they say, carry a sketchbook at all times. I believe that they did, even though the survival rate of sketchbooks is really, really low. It's much lower than other kinds of notebooks, than diaries or journals, because sketchbooks, by their very nature, particularly if they belong to Giotto or Leonardo, are full of amazing art, and they get pulled apart. People say, I like that picture, I will take it out, I will put it on my wall, and the context gets destroyed. So, as you know, probably in art history, there's a huge industry devoted to working out which tiny picture, which is in a gallery in Munich, came from the same sketchbook as one in Boston, in New York, in Florence, in London, wherever, and reuniting these pictures, or at least identifying what the shared source for all of these pictures. So this is a small industry at the moment. So yes, I think that there are things you can do with the sketchbook in terms of learning how to draw realistically, that there isn't really a practical other way. There isn't a cheat for. You just have to pick up your pencil and draw a lot. And if you don't have paper, how do you do that? Parchment is lovely stuff. It's incredibly tough. It has many virtues, but it's very hard to just casually sketch on it. And I think casual sketching is ultimately how artists learn how to do that.
Yeah, more trial and error, more iteration.
Exactly. And then you get that wonderful sense, and I've seen this because I'm drawing at a fairly incompetent level. When I start a sketchbook, normally by the end of it, I can see some kind of improvement because it was so bad at the beginning and a little less bad at the end. And that's an amazing morale booster when you look back and think, oh, that's kind of ropey, but this one I like at the end.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, and it's frozen in time. You can literally compare them. I mean, that's important not only for artistic growth, but also in solving the kinds of technical problems you're talking about with Giotto specifically.
Yeah, exactly.
There is something about the affordability of digital paint that has affected our appreciation for process, I think. And I think that in a way, we're better off because of digital practices, because of accessibility, affordability, that kind of thing. That's an improvement, but something that has been lost in that development is the kind of healthy reverence for, okay, this is costing me something to make these marks.
Yeah.
And the extension of that being, I should probably work some stuff out on paper first. I should probably solve some of these problems before I take the leap with the final. I think that both are good. I think both are good, and I teach both for that reason. It's just that I think it's so easy to just go digital. It feels safer. You've got the undo key. There's all these reasons to just favor that. And I think we just need to stay a little more even-keeled about it. I think we would benefit from that as artists, remaining tethered to this concept of, okay, it is expensive to use paint. Let's prepare for some of those risks with process. Let's work that out in the sketchbook, charcoal, graphite, watercolor, with these more temporary materials. I think that's wisdom. I think it'll still make the art better.
I would imagine an art program in which there was no undo key would be fun.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised nobody's made that yet. At least have a feature where we can turn it off, make a game out of it or something. I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about Humphrey Ocean and his MRI? This is absolutely fascinating. And it's like, see, this is this thing we knew for a long time, but we actually have some concrete proof.
The experience of interviewing and then meeting Humphrey was one of the most satisfying things in the entire process of writing the book. And for your listeners, Humphrey Ocean is, I guess, in his 70s now, and is a great British painter in that fantastic modern tradition. Like Oatley, he is an amazing colorist, very, very experimental, but has really, really strong technical chops. And he's one of these painters who he can slap a blob of gray down, a blob of yellow, a blob of red, and then suddenly you're looking at a goldfinch, and you just don't know how he did it. He does lovely birds. The reason I came to him was because he was the first artist ever to have his brain scanned in the early days of MRI. So we're going back 25 years. And these days, MRIs are everywhere, and people have MRIs all the time. In those days, there was basically like 3 scanners in existence. One of them was at Stanford. And because it was such a precious resource, they worked it round the clock. So in order to have his brain scanned while he was drawing a picture, because he was a recognized name artist, and no one could argue with the fact that he was really skilled, the psychologists flew over Humphrey Ocean and they got him into an MRI scanner at 2 a.m. in Stanford. His head had to be held in place with some contraption, which meant that they could, really drill down into his brain while he was drawing pictures.
Wow.
And what they found was when he was drawing a picture of a face, his brain did not engage the module. We have a face module in our brains, yeah? This is how we recognize each other. This is how we know that people are happy, sad, angry, or if we don't know how they are, it's where our brain goes to kind of puzzle out. But it's also where you recognize your mum, yeah? When you're drawing a picture of a face, if you're a trained artist, you don't use that at all. What you use is a totally different part of the brain, which is, it's much more to do with moving a sofa into a corner of the room or stacking a dishwasher. It's to do with arranging things in space. Because what he's doing when he paints a picture of you, he's looking for the triangle of light, the sort of oval of shade, the fact that it's slightly squarish, there's a corner here, it's blockish. He puts all these shapes together and then woof, he's got your likeness. And without ever drawing your nose.
Yeah.
He said to me, you can't ever draw a nose, right? You have to draw the shadow, the little thing which happens with the light. You have to sort of get the corner of it and then maybe highlight around the eye, and then you'll have a nose. But if you try and draw a nose, you're lost.
Yeah.
So they found out that proper artists are using modules of the brain which are basically designed for bricklaying or moving things through space or not bumping into tables.
Yeah.
If you're a waiter, for instance, it's the same part of that. And it kind of explains a lot about art.
Yeah.
They also found, this is going further forward, and it's when the art of MRI has got much more sophisticated. So it's not Humphrey's brain anymore, unfortunately, but it's the brains of lots of artists. And now, which is incredibly clever, they're able to sort of take a population of artists and a population of non-artists and make little brain maps of the average artist's brain against the average civilian's brain, if you like, and show the differences in terms of how big the different areas are, how big the white matter is and how big the gray matter is, which is a way of seeing how well exercised the brain is, because the brain is similar to a muscle in many ways. If you exercise a specific part of it, it will grow. The neurons will thicken up and you'll be able to see the difference.
Wow.
And they discovered that in the population of artists at large, odd parts of the brain are weirdly overdeveloped compared to civilians. But then they do similar experiments with mathematicians or teachers or, I mean, every kind of profession you can think of. Cab drivers was a big early one, which is how they discovered this thing about the hippocampus.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you change your brain? How do you do this? Well, clearly you repeat something, you do it again and again and again.
Yeah.
And the connections get stronger, because the qualification for being a trained artist, they decided, was having spent 3 hours a day drawing for the previous 2 years. I think it was something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that amount of drawing will change your brain. So I can tell you right now, your brain is different from mine, whatever else we have in common, because you will have built up those little weird parts of your brain to do with shape and form and shape in space. They then sort of slightly narrowed it down, and actually it comes after about 6 months, 6 to 9 months, I think it was, of applied work.
Wow.
Which I guess makes kind of sense. If you think back probably to when you were doing your art training, the first 6, 9 months, you probably didn't get anywhere. And then in the second year, you were starting to get quite good and feel confident about it. And I'm sure that the same again applies with all kinds of other enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
Notebooks can change your brain because there are things you can only do with notebooks or sketchbooks.
Don't expect instant results. It does take time. And of course, this is something we hear all the time, but we hear it all the time and often we still don't believe it, right? We think we're the exception. Oh, I didn't get it fast enough. There's something wrong with me. And it's like, no, you have to trust the process. You have to give your brain time to switch from looking for the three-dimensional face recognition to just shapes of color, being able to identify and then match on the canvas or the sketchbook the shapes of color or value. You have to let your brain shift over, and it needs practice and time to be able to do that. So don't get discouraged when, you sit down and you make a mark and it doesn't appear to be in the right place. Yeah, that's huge. We're your hosts, Chris Oatley
and Veronica Kosofsky. Our production coordinator is Mari Gonzalez Curia.
And this show is made possible by the Magic Box Academy.
Subscribe to this podcast on any of the major platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, YouTube.
And join our email list at magicboxacademy.com for notifications about future episodes, courses, and mentorship opportunities.
Get new digital art brushes with accompanying tutorial guides every month for an entire year with your free membership to the Magic Box Academy Brush Club. Join today at digitalartbrushes.com.
And until next time, friends, remember, you're a better artist than you think.